I built their entire system, the algorithm that kept their freight network alive. When I asked for a raise, the VP leaned back, laughed, and said, "You're technical, Julie. Stay in your lane." That was the moment everything shifted. 5 years of silence turned into a single move that rewired their future. You'll want to see how a quiet engineer made an empire answer for its arrogance. If you've ever been dismissed or underestimated, this story is for you. Subscribe, stay with me, and tell me if you'd have done the same. I used to think hard work was the antidote to invisibility, that if I built something brilliant enough, clean enough, undeniable enough, the world would have to see me. Instead, I watched my work get absorbed by people who knew how to speak louder, dress sharper, and take credit faster. My name is Julie Tran, Senior Systems Architect at Altivus Data Systems, the company that promised innovation but built its empire on borrowed brilliance. When I joined, they called me a culture win. Translation: the token engineer who made their diversity metrics look good while doing the heavy lifting behind the curtain. The product was Helix, my distributed optimization engine that balanced thousands of freight routes in real time. When I first ran it on our test servers, latency dropped so sharply the dashboard froze. I remember staring at the graph, a line collapsing downward like a miracle. I thought I'd finally built something that couldn't be ignored. Instead, my boss Colin printed the chart and pinned it above his desk with his initials in the corner. The company celebrated a breakthrough in operational efficiency. I got a $50 coffee card and a new workload triple the size. They called it trust. I called it debt. Still, I kept my head down because that's what good engineers do. We solve problems, not politics. My team joked that I spoke in code and caffeine. I didn't correct them. It was easier to let them believe I didn't care about recognition, that I was some monastic brain content with late nights and takeout containers. But I cared. Every line of code was a small confession, a breadcrumb trail leading back to someone who loved building more than breathing. And each day that trail got paved over by press releases and investor decks, where my work was repackaged under new buzzwords. I started noticing the pattern, how credit flowed upward and accountability sank. Colin would present my prototypes in meetings, rephrased just enough to sound like strategy. He'd nod toward me occasionally, not as a partner but as a prop. "Julie's been helping out on the back end," he'd say, like I was tightening bolts on his masterpiece. There's a particular ache that comes from being erased while you're still standing in the room. I learned to smile through it, to keep the mask of composure so tight that no one noticed when it cracked. My calendar filled with projects, my weekends disappeared, and the only recognition I got was in bug reports signed by people who never touched my system. Still, I stayed, because Helix was mine in every way that mattered. Its architecture, its logic, its heartbeat. And deep down, I believed meritocracy would catch up, that someone would finally see the patterns I'd built to hold their empire together. But the longer I stayed, the clearer it became. Altivus wasn't built on innovation. It was built on extraction. They didn't just want my code, they wanted my silence packaged as gratitude. And for a while, I gave it to them, convincing myself that patience was strategy. I didn't know then that patience was just the quiet before the turn. The moment I realized I'd hit my ceiling came disguised as a casual meeting invite. "Quarterly performance review," the subject read, though everyone knew what that really meant. Budget justifications dressed as feedback. Colin sat behind his glass desk like a game show host, waiting to hand out humiliation as a prize. I'd spent 3 years refining Helix, solving problems the rest of the team didn't even understand well enough to describe, and still my metrics were listed as supportive. When I mentioned that our core system now handled 40% more traffic with half the server cost, he nodded like a proud uncle, then said, "We're grateful for your dedication, Julie, but leadership's a different skill set. You're invaluable where you are." It was the kind of sentence that sounded like praise until you realized it was a cage. I'd already prepared my counter, market comparisons, salary data, even the revenue growth directly tied to my optimization layers. I slid the printout across the desk. He barely looked at it before smirking. "You're technical," he said. "That's your lane." Then he leaned back, laughing, a low, careless sound that somehow filled every corner of the room. That laugh didn't just dismiss my request, it erased me. It told me exactly how little my logic, my math, my patience meant in the hierarchy he worshipped. I'd spent years debugging his incompetence, softening his sloppy architecture, covering for him when his demos failed. I built the system he bragged about, and yet he laughed like I'd told him a joke. I remember the taste in my mouth, metal and dust, like breathing through static. I didn't argue. I just watched the reflection of his grin in the glass wall behind him. That's when something inside me finally settled, not like defeat, but like gravity choosing a side. I realized that waiting for fairness in a place like this was like expecting a virus to apologize for spreading. So I smiled. Not a polite smile, not even a bitter one. Just that small, unreadable curve that people mistake for acceptance when it's really the start of calculation. I stood up, thanked him for his time, and left. No slammed doors, no raised voices, just quiet footsteps that sounded like the end of something old. Outside, the office. Hum carried on, screens blinking, keyboards clicking, people chasing deadlines that didn't matter. I walked past the product wall, framed posters of Helix milestones with Colin's signature scrawled across each, and it hit me how absurd it all was. I had built the core of this company, and I was walking through it like a guest. The next day, I showed up early, logged into the server dashboard, and stared at the heartbeat of the system pulsing green across the network. It felt almost alive, loyal in a way humans weren't. That's when I made my decision. Not to quit, not yet, but to take back what was mine. Every piece of data, every log, every layer of architecture held my fingerprints. They had no idea that the foundation of their success was also my insurance policy. Colin's laugh still echoed somewhere in the back of my mind, but now it didn't sting. It measured time, a countdown. I began moving through the office differently after that, quieter, sharper. People thought I was retreating, that the raised denial had humbled me. They couldn't tell I was mapping exits, dependencies, vulnerabilities. I watched Colin take meetings with investors, promising scalability and performance metrics he couldn't even define. I took notes. Every time his voice filled a room with false confidence, I reminded myself that power isn't loud, it's precise. They had taken my credit, my time, my name, but they hadn't taken my leverage. I still owned the one thing they built their future on, and he had just handed me the perfect motive to use it. Long before Altivus turned Helix into their golden calf, I had already protected it like a secret religion. Back when it was still a prototype stitched together from sleepless nights and bad takeout, I filed the provisional patent under my maiden name, Juliana Tran Nguyen. No one in the company even knew that name existed. It wasn't paranoia, it was insurance. My mentor from grad school once told me, always sign your work in ink they can't erase. I didn't fully understand it then, but I do now. During those first few months when Altivus was still a startup with more ambition than funding, Colin pushed for speed over structure. He wanted quick demos, flashy presentations. I wanted durability. So while he was pitching investors, I was rewriting the system core in ways he'd never bother to read. I kept a private logbook, a kind of digital diary that recorded every decision, every algorithmic deviation, each time-stamped with precision. Later, when Altivus grew bloated and political, I started storing copies off-site, encrypted through an old network from my university days. That was the ghost of Helix, the one I fed when the company stopped feeding me. I knew how fragile memory could be in corporate ecosystems. The people in charge rewrote history as easily as commit messages, so I learned to hide truth inside structure. Line 208 buried in the optimization layer was my fingerprint, SLV2 signature embedded like graffiti beneath polished marble. They thought they owned Helix, but the soul of it pulsed somewhere else, in a repository tied to my credentials and my story. Around that time, I reached out to an old acquaintance, Mara Lewis. We'd met at a Women in Tech conference years earlier, bonded over whiskey and imposter syndrome. She left engineering to study law, ended up working in tech compliance. When I told her I'd patented Helix quietly, she didn't gasp. She smiled the way sharks might when they smell blood. "Keep everything," she said. "Logs, emails, drafts, even commit notes. When they finally show their teeth, you'll need receipts sharper than theirs." So I did. I archived server snapshots, version histories, even old bug trackers Colin had annotated with his lazy one-line fixes. Every artifact told a story. What I built, what they stole, what they never understood. The power of ownership isn't in holding something, it's in proving you did. Those months blurred into ritual. Code, coffee, archive, encrypt. While everyone else chased deadlines, I was quietly time-stamping my existence. I never said a word, never showed frustration again. Let them think the raise denial had tamed me. I was building a different kind of leverage, a ghost inside their system, invisible but undeniable. The patent wasn't just protection anymore, it was prophecy. One day, someone would try to stand on my work, and when they did, the ground would remember whose name was written underneath. After Colin's laugh, I stopped waiting for justice and started engineering it. Revenge, I learned, works best when it feels like maintenance, quiet, precise, invisible. I began with something harmless on paper, an internal monitoring feature designed to track load balancing and latency in real time. I pitched it at the Monday stand-up like a gift, a way for the company to visualize Helix's performance, predict bottlenecks, and optimize cluster behavior. Colin called it brilliant, slapped my back, and told the team to roll it out immediately. He didn't ask for documentation. He never did. Hidden inside that monitoring tool was a heartbeat, an encrypted telemetry function that pinged my private server each time Helix executed its optimization sequence. It didn't reveal company data, didn't breach privacy laws. It was clean, legal, and devastatingly informative. Every pulse it sent home told me where, when, and how often my algorithm was running. Within 2 weeks, I could map Altivus's entire infrastructure just by reading the rhythm of those pings. It was like listening to a stolen heartbeat, steady, constant, unaware that it was whispering its secrets back to me. That telemetry became my mirror, showing me the scale of what they had built on my foundation. The more they expanded, the louder the heartbeat grew. By April, it was everywhere. Europe, Asia, across multiple partner networks. They were scaling. Helix globally, all under my patent. The irony was exquisite. The more they succeeded, the stronger my evidence became. Each ping logged with timestamps, IP traces, execution logs, all cross-verified in my private database. I spent nights refining the interface, turning raw telemetry into a clean visual map of their dependency. It looked like an anatomical chart of arrogance, arteries of data flowing through veins I had written. I didn't feel guilt. I felt precision. Around that time, Mara and I started drafting what we jokingly called the Endgame dossier. 57 pages of logs, charts, and comparative analytics that outlined how Altivus had embedded Helix into every layer of its ecosystem. The proof was mathematical, undeniable. No one could claim coincidence when my code's internal architecture matched line for line, timestamp for timestamp. I remember Mara looking over one of the graphs and saying, "They built their cathedral on your algorithm, Julie. All you have to do is show them the deed." I wasn't ready to strike yet. Patience had become my most dangerous skill. So I played along, attending meetings, answering Colin's questions, fixing the bugs his new hires introduced. The company kept celebrating milestones, unaware that each success only deepened their dependence on me. One night, after a particularly long deployment, I sat alone in the darkened office, the hum of the servers filling the silence. On the dashboard, the heartbeat pulsed like a soft green metronome. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns too fast. What I felt was colder. Clarity sharpened into intention. They had taken everything that should have had my name on it. Now I had something that no title, no raise, no PR campaign could buy back. Proof. The kind that doesn't scream, doesn't demand. It just waits for the perfect moment to exist. I shut down the lights, grabbed my bag, and whispered to the empty room, "You have no idea what you've built." The heartbeat blinked one last time before I closed the laptop. Evidence was alive and loyal, and soon it would speak for me. When I finally decided to move, it wasn't out of rage. It was strategy maturing into inevitability. By then, my dossier was complete, my telemetry solid, my patent airtight. The only missing piece was leverage, a stage big enough that Altivus couldn't hide behind its PR gloss. I remembered a conversation from years ago, back when I still believed in mentorship and good intentions. Ray Donovan, CEO of Nexora Systems, had once told me at a conference, "When the people above you forget your name, remind them through the market." At the time, I laughed it off. Now I scrolled through my old contacts and found his message still pinned. It was time. I reached out through an encrypted channel, attached the opening page of my dossier, and wrote a single line. "This is what your competitor is built on." His reply came within an hour. "You have my attention. Let's talk." The following week, I was on a flight to Austin, sitting across from him in a glass-walled conference room that smelled like ambition and old money. Ray didn't waste words. "You built Helix," he said, "and they stole it." I nodded once. He studied me for a long moment before saying, "If you're looking for revenge, you'll get it. But if you're looking for precision, I can give you that too." That's when I knew I was in the right room. I didn't want chaos. I wanted consequence. We structured the deal over 3 days. Nexora would acquire my patent, secure all rights, and file an immediate intellectual property injunction against Altivus. I would walk away clean, no public drama, no interviews. Ray handled it like a chess master, calm, deliberate, ruthless. The paperwork was filed on a Friday morning. By Monday, Altivus's legal inbox overflowed with cease and desist letters, time-stamped with code lineage and patent verification. Mara called that night just to say, "You've done it." But I didn't feel victory. Not yet. I felt a shift, like the air right before a storm when everything hums with pressure. The following days were almost silent on my end, but inside Altivus, silence meant panic. My telemetry feed slowed, their usage of Helix dipped sharply, then spiked again as engineers scrambled to debug. They didn't know yet that the problem wasn't technical, it was existential. They had built their company on an algorithm they no longer owned. I watched the heartbeat flicker erratically like a trapped signal. Every pulse now marked another violation, another piece of evidence. I'd handed the fuse to someone who knew exactly how to light it. Ray's final words before I left Nexora stayed with me. "You didn't lose control, Julie. You just changed where it lives." For the first time in years, I slept through the night. I'd transferred power, not out of vengeance, but out of design. The system was finally working the way I built it, to balance load efficiently, even if it meant burning the servers that betrayed it. The first sign that the system was breaking came on a Monday morning, a bug ticket labeled "minor load anomaly." I recognized the phrasing. It was Colin's way of pretending a crisis didn't exist yet. By the end of the week, minor had turned into critical. Their enterprise clients were complaining about latency spikes, replication errors, even failed deliveries on premium contracts. The dashboards that once made investors drool were now stuttering red. I didn't have to guess what was happening. My telemetry feed showed their entire network stumbling under its own stolen weight. Every ping that reached my private server was a confession. They were still using Helix illegally, and every trace was logged against the patent that now belonged to Nexora. Mara texted me a single sentence. Ray pulled the trigger. Within hours, a cease and desist letter went public. 30 pages of surgical precision citing patent lineage, execution logs, and timestamps. Altivus's entire infrastructure was under injunction. I heard later that Colin spent that morning pacing the floor, yelling at engineers to just refactor it. Refactor what? I thought. You can't rewrite the foundation when you never built it. The company tried to contain the damage. HR sent out calm emails about legal clarification. PR posted vague tweets about intellectual property misunderstandings. Investors weren't fooled. The same reporters who once wrote glowing profiles about Altivus's revolutionary logistics engine now dissected every line of the patent filing. And there it was, my maiden name, clear and permanent, embedded in the official record. Juliana Tran Nguyen, inventor and owner. The internet did the rest. By Wednesday, Altivus stock began to fall. By Friday, it was hemorrhaging confidence faster than code could be patched. I walked through the office that week like a ghost observing its own eulogy. The energy had changed. Engineers whispered in hallways. Slack channels went dead. Colin looked older, hollow-eyed, avoiding me as if I carried the plague. In a way I did. The virus was truth, and it had finally replicated beyond containment. Late Thursday afternoon, my telemetry showed the final spike. One last desperate surge as they tried to reroute the system. Then silence. I closed my laptop and knew it was over, but fate has a sense of drama. The next morning, Colin's assistant summoned me to his office. No agenda, no reason. I expected blame, bargaining, maybe both. What I didn't expect was fear. He looked up as I entered, eyes bloodshot, voice stripped of arrogance. "Julie," he said quietly, "I need your help." I didn't sit down. "You built this system," he continued. "You understand it better than anyone. If we can just—" He stopped when I smiled. "If we can what, Colin? Undo 5 years of theft?" His hands clenched. "We can make a deal. Equity, promotion, whatever you want." I leaned forward slightly, enough for him to feel the shift in gravity. "You already had me, and you threw it away for applause." The silence stretched. He tried again, weaker this time. "You're really just gonna let it burn?" I looked at him and almost laughed. "Let it burn? Colin, I designed the match." I turned to leave but paused at the door long enough to let the truth land. This was never about revenge. It was about balance. You stole what kept your world running. Now you're learning what downtime feels like. Behind me, I heard the sound of a man who finally understood that power built on theft is always temporary. By evening, Altivus announced mass layoffs. 22 engineers, half the DevOps team, even the intern who once brought me coffee with a smile that said he still believed in the future. I didn't celebrate. I just walked past the glass, offices reflecting their own collapse, feeling the kind of quiet that doesn't ask for applause. The system had finally reached equilibrium. When the smoke finally started clearing, there was one name that still hadn't surfaced. Elena Ward, the CEO who had orchestrated Altivus's culture of quiet theft. She was the kind of executive who never raised her voice because her silence did the cutting for her. Rumor had it, she'd been managing the crisis from her penthouse, scheduling emergency board calls while publicly pretending nothing was wrong. I knew it wouldn't end until I faced her. So I walked into the headquarters one last time. The receptionist looked startled but didn't stop me. Maybe my face carried the kind of calm that people mistake for authority. Outside the boardroom, I could hear her voice, cool and precise, dismantling someone's excuses. When she saw me in the doorway, she didn't flinch. "Let her in," she said, dismissing the assistant with a flick of her hand. The room smelled like money and fear. "You must feel proud," she began. "You set fire to a company you helped build." I took a seat across from her and folded my hands. "I didn't light anything that wasn't already soaked in gasoline," I said. Her eyes narrowed, calculating. "You've made your point. Jared—" She stopped herself, correcting. "Colin was reckless. The board agrees. We're restructuring." "You can't restructure a theft, Elena. You can only confess it." She gave a small, practiced smile. "You're emotional. This is business." I leaned forward. "This was my life's work. You used it, hid it, and then you let him laugh in my face." Her voice softened in that dangerous way only powerful people can manage. "If I issue a statement naming you as the original creator, would that satisfy you?" I shook my head. "It's not about credit. It's about accountability. You built an empire on something you didn't own, and now the market knows it." For the first time, something flickered behind her composure, a tiny crack in the mask. "You're playing a dangerous game," she said. "Companies don't collapse because of truth. They collapse because of stories, and right now you're writing one." I stood, pushing back my chair slowly. "Then make sure you read the ending carefully." She smirked, her tone turning almost amused. "Be careful, Julie. You're not the only one with a long memory." I paused at the door and looked back. No, but I'm the only one who documented mine. I walked out before she could reply. Outside, the corridors were nearly empty, boxes stacked beside cubicles, nameplates gone. The echoes of what used to be a company followed me to the elevator. As the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. Not the quiet architect they once ignored, but the author of the story they'd tried to erase. Somewhere above me, Elena was probably already drafting her next press statement, spinning the narrative, painting herself as a victim of unforeseen circumstances. Let her. The truth was already embedded where no PR team could scrub it, in the code, the patents, the records. I didn't need her confession anymore. The system had already testified. It should have ended there, but people like Elena never surrender. They recalibrate. 2 weeks after the confrontation, I got an email from IT at Altivus, flagged urgent. They claimed suspicious activity had been detected from my old credentials and that I might be contacted by authorities. I knew immediately what it was, their last attempt to turn the hunter into the hunted. They were fabricating a trail to make it look like I'd siphoned data before leaving. It was retaliation disguised as protocol. For a moment, I felt the old chill of panic creeping in, that familiar dread of being outnumbered and unheard. Then I remembered. I had spent years documenting everything. They weren't chasing a criminal, they were running from evidence. I called Mara and told her exactly what happened. She didn't sound surprised. Classic counterattack, she said. They're trying to frame you before the market writes you in as the hero. We went to work. Mara contacted a forensics firm she trusted. I handed over every log and time-stamped backup I had kept. The investigation peeled back their scheme like rotten wallpaper. The supposed breach had come from a sandbox environment created by their own engineers, complete with backdated timestamps that didn't match the time zone metadata in the server files. One oversight, just one, was enough to expose everything. Within days, we compiled a 300-page counter-report and sent it straight to the Altivus board through Nexora's legal team. No headlines, no speeches, just precision. By the following Monday, the board announced Elena Ward's resignation for personal reasons. That phrase has always fascinated me. It's the corporate translation of public execution. My name was cleared quietly, but I didn't care about the optics. What mattered was that they couldn't rewrite the ending. The same people who had once dismissed me as technical background noise were now rebranding in my wake. Altivus began dismantling its logistics division, selling off pieces to salvage cash flow. Colin vanished from LinkedIn. The press moved on to the next scandal, and I found myself standing at the edge of a silence I'd waited years to earn. That's when the messages started arriving. Investors, startups, even old colleagues offering partnerships, executive titles, obscene salaries. And then there was one from Caleb Rowe, my former rival turned venture capitalist. His subject line was short, a seat with your name on it. The offer was seductive. CTO of a new division, total autonomy, equity that would make me wealthy beyond reason. For a few minutes I stared at it, wondering if this was what victory was supposed to look like. But the more I read, the more I saw the trap. They all wanted the same thing, control. They wanted the architecture, not the architect. I replied with a single line. I'm not building someone else's empire again. For the first time in my career, I felt free, not untethered, but unowned. I had fought for proof, but what I gained was clarity. You don't win by joining their tables. You win by designing your own. Freedom felt nothing like I imagined. It wasn't triumph or noise. It was silence, the kind that hums when the system finally stabilizes after years of overload. I spent days doing nothing, just sitting in my apartment surrounded by half-finished notebooks and empty coffee cups, wondering what came next. The world expected me to join another company, cash in, or take a victory lap on stage somewhere. But I didn't want applause. I wanted creation again, the kind that doesn't need permission. So I opened a blank workspace, typed a single line, and stared at it until sunrise. Project Vera. Transparent logistics by design. I wasn't starting another startup. I was building an open system where code could be shared, improved, and credited without the greed that poisoned everything I'd known. No investors, no contracts, no NDAs, just architecture that reflected the values I'd been denied: attribution, equity, and truth. I coded for weeks in near isolation, powered by cheap coffee and something close to peace. The first time Vera ran successfully, I didn't cry or cheer. I just smiled, the kind of quiet satisfaction that comes from reclaiming your own name. I released the beta publicly, open source and free, under my full name, Julie Tran Nguyen. Within 72 hours, Vera hit #1 on GitHub's trending list. By the end of the week, 3 universities reached out about using it in their data ethics curriculum. Developers who had once ignored me were tagging me online, offering to contribute. Even Brett from the old Altivus team sent a message that simply said, "We should have listened." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I knew somewhere out there, Colin and Elena were watching the rise of something they could never own, realizing the woman they'd dismissed had turned their theft into her foundation. Vera wasn't revenge, it was reflection. Proof that creation outlasts corruption. Now I work alone most nights, still in hoodies, still drinking gas station coffee, but every keystroke belongs to me. I don't build empires anymore. I build systems that outlive them. And if the industry ever dares to forget again, I won't shout. I'll remind them, with silence and a storm of code that carries my name. Looking back, I realize revenge was never the goal. It was clarity. What happened at Altivus wasn't just a story about stolen code, it was about how easily people confuse silence with weakness. For years, I believed if I worked hard enough, the system would reward me. But meritocracy without fairness is just a prettier word for exploitation. I learned that protecting your work isn't paranoia, it's preservation. The world moves fast, and people will take what you build if you don't draw the line yourself. But I also learned that power doesn't always have to roar. Sometimes it whispers in the form of documentation, proof, patience, and restraint. The real victory wasn't watching them fall, it was walking away clean, knowing I didn't have to destroy anyone to reclaim myself. I didn't need forgiveness from them. I needed freedom from the version of me that waited for their approval. Because sometimes forgiveness is self-liberation, but sometimes silence is the sharpest knife, the kind that doesn't wound but cuts you free. In real life, not every injustice will give you a perfect ending. People will steal credit, manipulate narratives, and walk away smiling. But your integrity is the only currency that compounds quietly. Keep records, learn your contracts, build something that reflects who you are, not who they want you to be. Don't rush to prove your worth to those who've already decided not to see it. Sometimes the most powerful move isn't confrontation, it's creation. When you build something that carries your signature, truth becomes self-evident. And truth, even when quiet, outlasts noise. How to get started today. Write down one skill, idea, or project that truly belongs to you. Protect it, document it, refine it. Start an archive of your work. Dates, drafts, receipts. Ownership begins with record keeping. Reach out to one mentor, ally, or colleague who respects your craft. Collaboration protects integrity. Give yourself permission to walk away from people or places that only value your silence. If you've ever been overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated, tell me your story in the comments. Subscribe for more stories like this, and remember, your voice is your proof.